Hopefully you've got a little time to hang out around the fire with your favorite doctor and some great stories. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. So snuggle down, settle in, and prepare for some great stories told by yours truly. We all get up to some less than stellar activities when we've had a few to drink. I'm no exception there, but always remember to be careful when you go out and who you go out with, especially this time of the year. You don't want to have your own experience one drunken night. It was all my fault. It had almost cost Felicia and I our lives. Our friend Sandy was having a house party, and we both wanted to go. Sandy threw the best parties, and they usually got pretty wild. The last one had been a real blowout, and we both had a little more than foggy memories from it. Sandy was celebrating her graduation from nursing school, so we all knew this one was going to be a serious rager before she had to settle in to pay student loans. Before we went, Felicia and I agreed that one of us needed to stay sober so we could get home safely. "We don't want a repeat of last time," Felicia reminded me, and I nodded as I remembered how the Uber driver had tried to hold us captive until we agreed to invite him in. Running in heels is never fun, but we had managed it that night and beat him to the door of our apartment. So, we did rock, paper, scissors for it. Went 10 out of 10, and I ended up with the loss. I wasn't happy about it, but I decided that I would do my best to stay sober so we could get home without having to A, get rides from creepy handsy guys, B, get murdered by a stranger, or C, have to take a cab that neither of us could afford. We pulled up to the party already in full swing, and I took a deep breath as I prepared to say no to temptation and be the best sober friend I could be. I lasted all of an hour before I just couldn't hold out anymore. Someone handed me a drink, didn't even ask, and I drank it before I could think better of it. It was one of the very tasty screwdrivers that were going around, so I decided then and there that this would be my only one. I could still hold out. One drink wasn't going to get me. An hour after that, I was completely plastered. Felicia was not pleased when she found me. She had decided to go all in, so now both of us were drunk and had no clue how we were going to get home. We took one look at each other, laughed, and said screw it. We drank way more than we should have that night and had a blast. We danced, we drank, and we mingled our way through the party. And when Sandy waved us out around 2 a.m., we were basically holding each other up. I staggered to the car, but I couldn't even get my key in the door to unlock it, let alone drive. Felicia and I decided that we would just walk home. It was 7 blocks from Sandy's house, but we had no chance of getting a cab this late, and the Ubers would be all weirdos at this point. Felicia agreed, but was basically dead weight after 3 steps. She was ready to sleep, and certainly wasn't interested in walking 7 blocks. I was holding her up, looking for options as my own buzz wavered, when I saw a yellow cab parked at the corner. I got excited. It was a little late for cabs, but I wasn't about to question Providence. The light was still on, the guy in the front seat looking pretty awake, and I thought our luck might be turning around as we staggered towards him. I knocked on the window, and the guy with the red hair snugged down under a driving cap jumped as he turned to look at me. He was a big guy, big with fat instead of muscle, and he looked surprised but also delighted as he rolled the window down. He asked how he could help us, and I told him we needed a lift. He asked where we were going, and after telling him the address, I offered to give him a nice big tip if he got us there safely, with no weirdness. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can manage that," he said with a big smile. "Hop in." So we piled in the back, he turned off his light, and off we went. Felicia was asleep about the time we made the first turn, but I decided to stay awake to make sure the driver didn't try any funny business. We were from a pretty big city, and girls had been going missing pretty regularly lately. You read about it on Facebook all the time. They go out, get a little drunk, and then they're never seen again. No one really knew what it was, but a lot of people thought it was a murderer. It was scary to think about, but I felt a little safer being in a real cab rather than an Uber with some random guy. You never quite knew what the vetting process was on Uber, but I knew the cab companies had to do background checks on their drivers, so at least this fellow was on the up and up. "You ladies coming from a club?" he asked, making small talk as he took his first left. "A house party," I said, trying to be polite. "Our friend was throwing a real heck of a get-together, and we partied a little too hard, I think." "Sounds like fun. Looks like your friend had a little too much, though." "Yeah, she does that sometimes. I was supposed to stay sober so I could drive us home, but I'm not very good at it." "Well, I guess it's a good thing for me, then." I made a non-committal noise and settled back. There was a little holder on the partition with waters in it, and when I reached for one, I saw the cabbie turn to track my movements. He seemed interested in what I was doing, and I held up one of the waters and said one of his fares must have left it behind. It was a shame because my stomach was a little too full of alcohol, and some water would have been really nice. "Oh, those are for my fares. I have a bunch in the cooler in here. I replaced them as needed. Help yourself." I thanked him, testing the seal to make sure that it was still sealed. It seemed to be, but I never got it open. The feel of the wheels beneath me was lulling me to sleep, and I was losing the fight. I tried to stay awake, but I was just too drunk. My eyes kept slipping shut and opening, and as I threatened to go under for good, I heard the cabbie's phone ring. He picked it up, talking to someone, and it was like his whole demeanor changed. There was a very different voice than I was used to. Gone was the jovial guy who had picked us up, and now he was gruff and kind of short with whoever he was talking to. It seemed like a complete flip in personality. "Yeah, I got him. We'll be there soon." I started to ask what he meant by that, but before I could question the statement, I was unconscious. I don't know how long we were out for, but I woke up suddenly, unsure of where we were. I looked around, groggy and disoriented. Felicia was still sleeping beside me, dead to the world and not showing any signs of coming back, and the cabbie was still behind the wheel and driving us home. At least, I thought he was. I glanced out the window, no longer seeing tall buildings and concrete, and I thought he must have taken a wrong turn. We were in the country. The buildings traded for rural pavement and shadowy houses. Everything was dark outside, no street lights this far out in the country, and I just watched it whiz by for a moment as I tried to make sense of it. I was confused, not sure how we had gotten so lost. Then I remembered the conversation before we passed out. "Yeah, I got him. We'll see you soon." Even in my drink-addled brain, I remembered those words. I glanced at the numbers on the dashboard clock and was surprised to see that we had been in the cab for over an hour. It shouldn't have taken that long to get home. 7 blocks would have been an easy drive this late at night. And as I tried to sit up, I felt something press against my wrist. The unopened water was a cool pressure against my arm. I didn't remember opening it and realized I must have fallen asleep before I could drink it. My vision swam as I tried to come upright, and I blinked quickly to clear it. "Where?" I tried, but my throat was dry. "Where are we?" The cabbie jumped a little, probably figuring I'd passed out like my friend, and when he looked over his shoulder, I heard again the voice of that happy cabbie who had picked us up again. "We're driving to your home." I tried to make his words make sense, but it was like wading through mush. This isn't right. I live in the city. You told me 175 Worth Street, he said, tapping his phone in the holder on the dash. No, I slurred, trying to make my head stop spinning. It was 751 Worthy Street. We were... I put a hand to my mouth as hot vomit threatened to come coursing up. We were only 7 blocks from our house. He put a theatrical hand to his brow. Oh my gosh, I guess I put the address in wrong. Let me just find a place to turn around and we'll get you back on track. He started tapping at his phone, but I could see he wasn't hitting anything. I was suddenly wary, some of my intoxication ebbing away as he put on a show of trying to get the address right. I remembered those stories about the girls that had gone missing, and I wondered if our names and faces would be on the news tomorrow. Would they think we just wandered off after drinking too much? Would they even look for us? He turned down a side road, saying he was going to turn around, but instead of turning around, he kept driving. I banged feebly at the glass that separated us, telling him he was going the wrong way, but I was so weak. I felt very dehydrated, my mouth dry and my head spinning. I reached for the water, but I thought better of it. I didn't want anything he might give us, and as the top came off, I squeezed it against the little holes that allowed us to hear him. He jumped and cursed, turning around to glower at me as the voice from the phone came back again. You stupid bitch! I hope you keep that energy when they get you. They'll teach you some manners. My blood ran cold at that, and I let the empty water bottle fall as I looked for other options. I tried the doors, but the child locks were on, and I couldn't get it open. I started to panic. I kicked at the door, at the glass, but each kick was more feeble than the last. I was starting to feel like I might pass out. The cabbie laughed, telling me about all the terrible things the people he was taking me to would do, and my vision was swimming with tears. I bent over and puked in the floorboard, some of my wooziness clearing up as I purged the liquor, but it also left me feeling weak and unsteady. I banged my head against the glass as we finally came to a halt, and I went shakily to the window to see where we were. We were not miraculously in front of my apartment, the whole thing a dream or a hallucination, but in a vacant lot down some country back road. At the end of the vacant lot, perched like a gargoyle, was a white van waiting for us to arrive. As we sat idling, the doors came open and shadowy figures started getting out. I felt my blood run cold as they walked towards us, stopping halfway between as if waiting for the cabbie. I thought again about my car sitting in front of Sandy's house and how I could have driven us home if I had just stayed sober. Looks like we've reached your destination, said the cabbie, turning around to flash me a big creepy grin as he slid his seatbelt off. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. And he hopped out to go talk to them. I shook Felicia, trying to wake her up, but she was little more than dead weight. They would get her. They would get me in my current weakened condition. I couldn't fight them off. I could barely keep my head up, and I cried bitter tears in the back of that cab. If I was lucky, maybe they'd just kill us, but I doubted it. We were both likely to end up in some overseas brothel or on the streets of South America, and either prospect was grim. The cabbie shook hands with one of the shadow people, pointing back at the cab and likely telling them he had a couple of half-drunk girls ready for transport. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no chance anyone was coming to help us. We'd be heading wherever in no time, gone and forgotten, never to be seen again, and there was nothing we could do about it. It appeared, however, that someone had other ideas. They had started walking towards the cab when lights suddenly lit up the back glass. Cars suddenly began pulling up, vans and undercover cars, and people came out then with guns drawn. The men in the headlights of the cab put their hands up, and as they were surrounded and cuffed, they were dragged off to those vans pretty quickly. They took the men away, and that was when they seemed to realize that they had people in the back of the cab. They helped us get somewhere safe so they could get us checked out, and I'm pretty sure Felicia never woke up through the whole thing. They kept assuring us that we were okay, that we were safe, but all I could do was cry. I felt like I had been plucked from the brink at the last minute, and I thanked them with every breath I had. That was how I was almost trafficked by some gang or organization or another. The cops told us the less we knew, the better, and I agreed. I haven't drank since then, and now I'm a permanent designated driver for our group. I take friends of friends home too, sometimes intoxicated women we've met that night, just to make sure that no one goes through what we went through. So be wary if you see a strange cabbie waiting while you're wandering home one night. You may be in for a longer trip than you bargained for. I never thought I'd say it, but I actually can't wait for the weather to get a little better. Kinda miss the sun sometimes, though I'm sure after the first week of summer I'll already be complaining about the heat. Going from one bar to the next, it seems. Let's hear a story about a murderer. A murderer who learns a very important lesson about life. I'll let you decide what that lesson might be, but it's one of my favorite Star Wars quotes, if that helps you out. So, let's learn a little more about number 23.
His stool looked more like a throne the way he sat on it, and he kept throwing them back to the general rapture of the onlookers. He was middle-aged, late 40s by his look, and his body was beginning to run into the zone of comfortable fat that seemed the providence of men on the cusp of old age. He'd come here every night for the last week, and for the last week, I'd come here to observe him. I knew his name, which was a rarity. Most of them were just part of the faceless mass. Some of them would remain faceless forever, but some of them were known to me before the end. I was their shadow, the one who knew their secrets, and the one who ushered them from life to death. At that moment, I remembered my first. They say you never forget your first, and I can assure you that's the case. How could I forget her? She ushered me into the world of the living, so it was only fair that I usher her into the world of the dead. My mother was not what you would call a loving woman. My father left shortly after my birth, and my mother became a hateful, gin-soaked creature who lived to work, drink, and remind me of how worthless I was. I must thank her one day. She made me into the man I am. All those years of being told how I was garbage, the waste of space, and now I'd never amount to anything, had crafted me into a humble target for her to hurl her rage at, until that one night when I'd finally had enough. She was dying. That was plain enough to see. It was a close race between the booze and the smokes to see who could come out on top. The arthritis was making a nuisance of itself as usual, and as I cut her meat, she continued to pick at my subconscious like a junkie picking at scabs. The meat wasn't cut small enough. Now it was cut too small. It was a funny shape, and what could she expect from a worthless pile of shit like me after all? She was ashamed of her weak, servile son, and if there was any justice in this world. But you know, I never found out what would happen if there was any justice in this world. At that moment, I had suffered all I meant to. I yelled for her to shut up, and I stuck the knife I'd been using to cut her meat into her chest. She looked up at me, and her eyes were so full of terror and wonder that I put the knife back in again. I'd stabbed her 5 times before she made a sound, and even that was unintelligible. A gurgling, incoherent sound that befit a formless hag like my mother, hand in glove. I moved her body and told the police she had come home drunk and attacked me. They let me collect her estate, such as it was, and I moved on. The only thing worthwhile that I ever had from her was the knowledge that I was good for at least one thing. He got up from the stool, and I tensed as I came out of my memories. He took a step for the door, but then changed his mind and walked to the bathroom instead. I settled myself and waved the waitress away when she starts to check on me. This was not the dying place I had planned for him, but I could feel his time getting close. I used the money I'd gotten from my mother's estates to travel. When I say travel, you probably think of planes or buses, but my mother's estate had mostly come in unpaid bills. $50 in a savings account, another $500 she'd hidden in the bookcase and forgotten about, and $1,500 in a life insurance policy I'd never known existed. I sold all the possessions she had left her debts unsettled, and melted into the exciting world of public vagrancy. I rode the rails, slept under bridges, and all the time I kept honing my craft. I killed a bum in New York that was found in a river later, his pockets holding $500 and a dirty picture of a woman. Then I found a junkie in Jersey, who I later found out had a wife and kids he'd been hiding his drug problem from. Then 2 prostitutes in Queens who had been sharing the same man without knowing it, and all the while me staying one step ahead of the authorities. The investigations weren't lengthy. These were street people, or people up to no good, and their investigations were forgettable. The one to matter since my mother was number 5. Number 5, we'll call him James, was a New York businessman with a dark secret than the money he laundered from the mob. I was back home for the first time in years when I bumped into James purely by mistake. Coming out of a bus station, he plowed into me on the sidewalk and barked at me to look where the hell I was going. Some people would have killed him right then and there, but that wasn't my way. The stalk was the biggest thrill for me. Soon I discovered that James had a little secret of his own. He used to pick up whores late at night in his fancy red sports car. He liked to take them to the docks, and after a little backseat back and forth, he would drug them and sell them to people who knew who would pay top dollar for good stock. These weren't mobsters either. These were men who could afford to make sure these women disappeared. Afterwards, he'd get high in his car and zone out as he thought his bleak thoughts had mellowed. He'd come back to reality pretty quick when I slid the knife across his throat. His eyes rolled up as I told him how bad he'd been as his life dribbled out down his cheap suit. The police found enough evidence in his briefcase to follow the paper trail, but I was long gone by then. My latest quarry returned from the bathroom and staggered towards the door again. After bumping into a few tables and accepting the scornful shouts and hard shoves from the patrons, he found the door and wrapped his hand around the handle. I started to rise, and then his friends called to him from the door, offering him just one more for the road. "Well, how can I say no to such a generous offer?" he asked, and wandered back to the bar for one more drink. Killing this one would be doing him a favor, just like number 18. Number 18. Anna had been sweet enough to make me think about giving it all up and living a normal life. Too bad life is rarely that easy. During my travels, I caught pneumonia and was hospitalized for nearly a week. Anna was my nurse. She was the sweetest person I'd ever met, and after bringing me back from the brink of death, she found out I was homeless and wandering and invited me to stay with her until I could get back on my feet. I stayed with her for nearly a year, and the two of us became closer than we'd expected. In that year, I never once felt the urge to kill. We'd been planning our wedding when they diagnosed her with cancer. As she underwent chemotherapy, tried new diet after miracle cure, after experimental treatment, I went back to my old respite. That year, Chicago was hit by a serial killer. 9 victims in 9 months, but my 10th victim was the only one that mattered. On her deathbed, Anna told me she knew I was the killer. She'd followed me one night, putting her own health at risk. She said she had been certain I wasn't cheating on her. She saw me stab a man and push him into the canal. She was tired of living, tired of the pain, and she asked me to be her mercy angel. I gave her what she wanted. By the time the air bubble in her IV killed her, I was already gone. One for the road, turned out to be more like 5. When my prey finally shuffled towards the door, I was there to hold it open for him. He thanked me in a slurry voice and stumbled out into the night, the king of the inebriates. I followed after him like a hungry wraith, and when he turned down an alley, I knew his time had come. I tucked my knife up in my sleeve and began to creep up behind him as I moved to the end of the alley. I heard his zipper go down, and as he sent a stream of piss arcing across the bricks, I stalked in quietly behind him. North Carolina was not my desired destination, but I'd enjoyed the 3 years I'd been here. After Anna, I was drunk more than I was sober. Beer when I had money, hobo brew when I didn't, and always I rode the rails from one place to another. I picked up work in Maine and drank my way to Philadelphia, sloshed my way back to Chicago, where I somehow drank my way into a drunk tank in Warren, North Carolina. After my release, I worked odd jobs for odd folks. I landed a steady gig as a day cook in a little greasy spoon diner, and only felt the urge to kill a few times. The people in Warren were good people, and the people I killed were bad people, people who had tainted that image. A rapist I knew from my days on the rails who blew into town and started doing his own stalking. A foul-mouthed drunk who kept driving after they took his license. A woman with a taste for married men. And finally, Mr. Ham here, number 23. Mr. Ham, though, he was the worst of the bunch. He hated the homeless with a passion, and I suspected that he had killed some of my fellow rail riders for imagined crimes. I had watched him for a week, marked his movements carefully, and now it was time to see him put away for good. I raised the knife as I came up behind him and prepared for the strike that would take him while he urinated. That's when he turned, and his arc of piss hit me full in the face. I stumbled backwards, momentarily blinded, and a solid blow took me to my knees. I toppled, legs hurting, and a heavy right struck me in the chest as I flailed to get back up. I wiped at my eyes, and there was Ham, towering over me. He was no longer looking quite so drunk. Perched on my chest like the world's ugliest gargoyle, he smiled down at me, looking like the cat that finally got the cream. "I knew you were watching me all this time, so I thought I'd see what your intentions were. I suspected you were trying to kill me. Kind calls to kind, after all. But I do have one question before I kill you. The tip of my own knife pressed against my throat. How many lives have you counted?" I didn't have to ask what he meant. You would have been 23. He leaned in, wishing to impart a secret before the end, and whispered, "You will be my 44th.
I think it's time we transition out of the bars and into the next setting that usually leads to the hospital. I've got a little bit of experience working in a hospital. I did about 6 years on between the switchboard and transport, but I never got a call like this in all my time working on the old boards. So let's hope that if you're a phone service operator, you don't get a call from no name, no number. I work in a hospital call center. It's not great work, but it pays the bills. Though you may not think it, you get a lot of calls during the 8-hour shift you work. Usually it's just people trying to find a relative who might be in there, someone trying to schedule an appointment in surgery, maybe even someone seeking medical advice. I'm apparently not qualified to do any of those things, so the job became a lot of telling people, "One moment please while I transfer you." Then you send them off to their desired department, or not, and you get to talk to them again, except less polite this time. You get a lot of angry people too, most looking for billing, or maybe because they got charged for a hospital service they didn't receive. Those people are best sent off as quickly as possible, before they can get a good head of steam going. There are 4 to 6 of us in the department at any given time. It's mostly college kids trying to pay their bills, or older people looking for a little extra on top of their social security. All in all, I think around 10 of us work the switchboard, and you get to know your coworkers pretty well, especially when there's so few of you. We also take turns working the midnight shift, most of us working the day or the mid shift primarily, and at the end of the month, we all walk away with a nice chunk of overtime for our troubles. People being people, there's always 12 or 16 hours of overtime a month. No one minds much. The job's pretty easy. And I liked having a job where I could finish my schoolwork or play on my phone for 8 to 16 hours and still get paid. That was before the heavy breather. Not a week went by where he didn't get at least one notation in the logbook. The notations were supposed to be for strange or unusual calls. For the last few months, most of the entries have been a heavy breather. We had named the caller because their calls were all pretty much the same. You'd pick up the phone and hear the telltale heavy breathing on the other end and know what was going on. We all just figured it was some pervert, some lonely sicko trying to get his rocks off to someone on the other end. You'd hang up before he could get his satisfaction and make a note of it in the logbook. I say these things like they were regular occurrences, but in truth, I had yet to get the mystery caller. Every other operator had gotten him at least twice, some of them 3 or 4 times, but I had never managed to see what all the fuss was about. I would get my wish a couple of days later, though. 3 days of midnights? My boss just shrugged at me as she sank the pushpin into the bulletin board. She posted our schedules by hand every week, despite the rest of the hospital having access to an electronic payroll system which generated the schedule for them. Martha is old school, though. Probably since she's been here since they pulled her out of the foundation when they broke ground. She's one of the best bosses I've ever had, too. She doesn't like how short-handed we are any more than we do. Sorry, kid. Roger says he's taking the weekend off to go visit his boyfriend. He's always doing this on such short notice. I swear I'd have fired him on the spot if we weren't so short-handed. Still, all 3 nights? You're the only one with an open schedule, kid. I'll give you next weekend off if you want it. Scout's honor. Martha made the promise so freely that I took her up on it in a heartbeat. A promise from Martha was worth its weight in gold. She couldn't possibly have known that this would likely be the last weekend I'd ever sit behind that desk. Friday night went pretty normally. I arrived at 11 p.m., brewed a thermos of coffee, and got to my desk around 11:15. Jordan and Aiden were there, finishing up their calls and cleaning up their stations as they waited for midnight. We chatted a little as I logged on, discussing call volume and talking about tonight's call-in schedule. Apparently, there was a team I needed to call in at 4 a.m. for a 5 a.m. case, and they added that the heavy breather had been calling a lot today. They don't say anything, they just keep calling about once an hour, like they're looking for someone. Pam swears she heard them say a name before they hung up, but Pam likes to make stuff up for attention. I got a little excited when Jordan told me that. If they were calling more often, then maybe I'd get to talk to them. I know it's weird to hope that a crazy person will call up and breathe on the phone, but I really wanted to experience it. I felt like it would make me like everyone else, and I was a little sore that I hadn't gotten him yet. I would get my wish about an hour later. It was about 12:30 when they called. I was sitting in the call center basement, sipping coffee and checking Reddit on my phone, when I heard the computer chirp and inform me that I had a call. It was from an unlisted number, not that uncommon, so I picked it up without thinking much about it. When I picked it up, it sounded like someone was sitting too close to a fan. The blowing was annoying, but I was a professional, and I tried to power through it. Southwest Medical Center, how may I help you? The noise on the other end sounded different slightly. I realized all at once that it was rain coming down hard on a window somewhere. Was it raining outside? It hadn't been when I came in. There hadn't been a cloud in the sky, actually. The rain covered it slightly, but as I sat in silence, I began to hear the deep breathing on the other end. There he was. There was the weird caller. Hello, Southwest Medical, can I help you? The breathing persisted, overtopped by the rain that hit hard on the window of wherever they were. I reached for the book to start scribbling down the usual message when I heard something over the phone. I heard a voice. Sorry? I asked, taken aback a little. It's always dark here. The pen fell out of my hand. No one had ever heard this person talk. It was always just heavy breathing for a couple of minutes before they hung up. Had they been waiting for something? I wondered for a moment if they'd talked before and maybe no one had told me. Was I the first one they'd ever talked to? It's always dark here, they repeated, and this time I stopped thinking and started listening. Where are you? I asked, not sure what else to say. The rain is so loud tonight. The voice was neither male or female, and sounded low and growly, like someone getting over a cold. Look, I'm not sure who you are, but You've called a hospital. If you need some help, I'll be happy to help you, but otherwise, I need to... Cherish says hi, the voice whispered. That made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had a sister named Cherish. She was about 12, and as far as I knew, she was asleep at my parents' house. I shook off my fear and began to become a little angry. Whoever this was, they were obviously having a laugh on my account, and it really wasn't funny. Who is this? Roger, is this you? I swear to God, I'm going to HR if this is you. This isn't even a little bit funny. You need to stop. That's when the line went dead. I held the phone against my ear for a few more seconds before putting it in the cradle and looking around nervously. I expected Roger, or maybe Jordan, to pop out of the break room with their cell phone, laughing because they'd spooked me. All the company I got, though, was the sound of the air conditioner cycling overhead. I sat for a few more minutes, drumming my fingers, trying to forget the call. The more I thought about it, the weirder it got, though. My coworkers would have called back to make fun of me if this was a prank. If it wasn't them, then some stranger on the phone had called up and said my sister's name. Coincidence or not, I needed to be sure. My mom picked up on the fourth ring, and I could hear Dad grumbling in the background. Hello? Mom, hey, sorry, is Cherish okay? I know that's a weird question, but I could hear her sitting up in bed. Are you okay? You sound upset. Just please, answer me, Mom. Is Cherish okay? I don't know, hun. She's at sleepaway camp this week. My blood ran cold. I need you to call down there and make sure she's okay. What's all this about? She said groggily. I got a weird phone call a minute ago, and now I have to make sure she's okay. My phone rang, and I looked at the number. Unknown name, unknown number. It couldn't be them again. Mom, I need to call you back. Just promise me that you'll call the camp and make sure she's okay. Mom said she would, and I hung up and picked up the incoming call. I was immediately bombarded by the sound of rain on glass and muffled heavy breathing. The caller's voice sounded watery, slurry, like they'd recently choked on some water. They sounded like someone with a sore throat or a bad case of pneumonia. Like a drowned person. Hello? Hello? Who is this? Cherish needs your help. I gritted my teeth and tried not to scream into the phone. Whoever this is, you need to stop. I'm not amused. You're not funny. I want you to... He's gone to get her. She thinks he's her friend, but he isn't. He wants to hurt her. You have to stop him. Who's gone to get her? The woodsman. He's a bad man. He wants your sister. I didn't have the slightest idea who this person was talking about, but whatever their game was, I was starting to get freaked out. Look, this isn't funny. If this is a joke or something, it's really gone to... The line went dead then, and I was left with static. I spent the next hour in a fitful state. I didn't want to call Mom back and bother her with this, but what if whoever that was wasn't kidding around? Surely my sister wasn't stupid enough to just go off with someone into the woods, right? I didn't know, and that lack of knowledge made me nervous. I began to feel the walls of the basement closing in on me, and the claustrophobic feeling made me shake. When the phone rang again, I caught it on the first ring without even really looking. Hello? I could hear the quaver in my voice. The rain was softer now, but the voice was no less intrusive. He has her! It all but screamed at me, and I thought I could hear someone in the background crying and screaming just under that husky rasp. He's hurting her! Please, hurry! Where are you? I screamed at them, leaning forward as though I could fall into the computer screen. Where has he taken her? If this was a prank, I was buying it, hook, line, and sinker. I could hear someone, a small girl it sounded like, screaming and crying, as someone did God knew what to her. My cell phone roared to life. I looked down to see it was Mom and picked it up without thinking. Mom was hysterical on the other end. She and Dad were in the car, driving up to the camp. The counselors had gone to check on Cherish and found her bed empty. What's more, they found muddy boot tracks going into her cabin, and then leaving out the other way. They can't seem to track them. The rain here, it's been torrential. The state police are bringing in the tracking dogs, and they're going to start as soon as they can. She's in the woods, Mom. Someone has her, I sputtered out, still hearing the screams on the phone. Mom was silent for a few breaths. How do you know that? I've got a caller on the phone who says she's alive, but it sounds like he's hurting her. They're in the woods, Mom. Tell them to search the woods. She hung up on me, and when I picked up the phone, it had gone dead again. I sat in the silence and felt utterly impotent. Should I leave and go help them look? My job wasn't really the thing holding me there. I was sure people would understand if I abandoned my post, but I was hoping that the mystery caller would give me more information. Every second counted now. If my information would help them find my sister a little quicker, then all the better. I muddled through a few late-night calls while I waited, and I'm sure the people on the other end could tell I was tense. After an hour, Mom called to let me know that they'd arrived at the camp. The rain had made it very difficult for the dogs to find a trail, but they'd started searching the woods anyway. The police were confident they could locate her, but Mom wasn't so sure. She sounded scared and tired and just plain defeated. When she hung up, I stared at the phone on my desk and willed the mystery caller to call again. They'd been so chatty before. Why had they gone silent now? I pulled up call logs on my computer then and started trying to find the number. No name, no number was all I ever got. I know in movies the police can easily decode these private numbers, but I work for a hospital and not even the emergency part of the hospital. My resources were limited to what I could do on my out-of-date computer. When the phone rang 20 minutes later, I looked at the number and almost knocked it off the desk in my haste. No name, no number. Hello? Hello? Where are you? I need you to... He's killing her! He's trying to make it last, but he's killing her! The voice whispered harshly. Where are you? The police are looking for her, but I need to know where you are. The voice was silent for a moment, and I thought I'd lost them again. On the other end, I could hear whimpers, and the person making those noises sounded broken. Hot tears ran down my face as I listened to what could be my sister's final moments. I began to beg the voice to tell me where they were. I lay my hands against the desk and cried, letting the tears flow as the voice seemed to contemplate how to answer me. When I played here, it was about a mile from the camp, over a creek, past the blackberry fields, and up a little hill. His house is at the top of that hill. I've been here for so long, though. I don't know if any of those things are still here. Please hurry. She doesn't have much longer. Then the line went dead. I called my mom and gave her the information. When she relayed it to the counselor, they knew exactly where she was talking about. The house belonged to the groundskeeper, and he had lived there for quite a long time. She said the police were on their way now to check it out, and she asked me to thank the person on the phone if they called back. I waited for an hour, another long and agonizing hour, and when my cell phone rang, the number made my skin crawl. Unknown name, unknown caller. Were they calling my cell phone this time? That seemed unlikely, and when I picked it up, I was greeted not by the raspy voice of the sick child, but by the stony voice of Officer Darraway from the state police. He told me they'd found Cherish and the groundskeeper in his cabin. She ain't in a good way. The bastard used the time he had to do some pretty upsetting things. She's alive, and we're sending her on the next flight to the nearest hospital. That's the one you work at, I believe. I thanked him and told him to tell my parents that I'd be waiting for her when she got here. Your mama tells me you've been in contact with another child, and they gave you directions to find your sister. Yes, she just called me out of the blue. I don't even know how she got my number. He was silent for a moment. You'll forgive me for saying so, but that seems highly unlikely. How do you mean? I said, startled. The groundskeeper didn't have a phone in his cabin. His cell phone was on his person when we recovered him, and there's no other child in that cabin. That's impossible. They said they'd been there for a very long time. They've been calling for weeks. Look, I appreciate you helping us find your sister, but this whole story seems very far-fetched. That being said, I don't think we'd have found your sister without your help. I want to take a statement from you when I get there, but just know we don't consider you in any way connected to this, despite the oddness of your claim. I thanked him, and he thanked me before hanging up. I was getting ready to call Marta, the 6 a.m. person, so she could come in a little early to relieve me, when a familiar caller popped up on my screen. No name, no number. I picked it up as I prepared to thank the caller for their help. I had just started thanking them when I heard the heavy breathing on the other end, and stopped. The sound was completely different. The caller had a husky tone to his breath, and you could clearly hear their breathing jagged up and down as they went about whatever they were doing. This was no child's breathing. This was an adult, and I hung up the call before I could think too much about it. I sat there in a daze as I pulled the call log towards me. I logged the heavy breather, but thought for a moment about recording the other caller too. They had saved my sister's life, whoever they had been, and I decided not to add them to the log. I called Marta and told her what had happened. She agreed to come in for me and said she'd see me soon before hanging up. I'm sitting with my sister in the ICU as I write this, but I can't help but wonder who that mysterious caller was. How did they call me? How did they know where to find me? My sister is heavily sedated right now, but I'm a little afraid of what she might tell me when she comes to. Does she know the girl who called me? Did she tell her how to contact me? I'm afraid to go back to work now. I'm afraid of who else might call me when I again man that desk. What other lost souls might be just a phone call away? Not much farther to go till it's time to take another little break and tell you goodbye. But don't worry, I've got 2 great stories left, and I really think you're gonna like them. We've all had some weird shifts at work. I do a lot of my shifts at night, as many of you know, but I don't think I've ever quite had a night shift like this one. So, let's hear a little bit more about the night shift at Braxton Moor. The job wasn't fancy, but it would pay the bills, and that was what I needed right then. I'd graduated high school a few years ago, and no sooner had I thought about entering the job market than COVID hit and shut a lot of the world down. Suddenly, most of the things I would be qualified to do would make me a non-essential worker, so I decided to make my mom happy by going to college. She wanted me to take the time and get a degree or a certificate or something, but after 2 years and 2 changes of major, I had very little to show for my efforts. My counselor, after scowling at my file for a few minutes, finally sighed and said something to me that I'll never forget. Some people do well in school. To some people, this is a chance to engage with peers and better themselves. But this isn't the case for everyone. I feel like you may be trying too hard to be something that someone else wants you to be. Why not go out and live a little? Come back when you decide what you might like to be. Mom didn't much care for that answer, and she said if I was planning to drop out of school, then I would need to help with the bills. Dad was retired, and Mom was getting ready to retire. The last thing they wanted was another useless mouth to feed. So, started looking for a job, but the list of potential positions wasn't very long. I didn't want to flip burgers or wash cars or something I'd have to fight high school kids for, but I didn't have the skills for anything like maintenance work or coding. I didn't have the job experience for anything that wasn't entry level, and when they asked if I'd be willing to work nights, I said I would. When the site I was using sent me a list of potential jobs, I grimaced at the 6 names. Not a lot of options, but I suppose there had to be something there. There were 2 fast food jobs, so they went out. There was a part-time janitor position, but I was looking for something full-time. That left a job with a cab company, a bagger at Publix, and an assembly line job for Braxton Moor. That one surprised me because you didn't often see entry-level positions open there. Braxton Moor was an air conditioner company, one of the biggest ones in the region, and it was a place where people usually stayed for quite some time. I was in for a further surprise when I read the hours. Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Candidates will need to be able to stand for 3+ hours, be required to work with a particular instruction and minimal breaks, and will not be allowed to leave for the entirety of the shift. Benefits will be from day one, and pay will be very competitive. Looking at the projected pay rate, I saw it was very competitive. That made up my mind. I sent the message to the recruiter, and about an hour later, I had an interview the next day. So that's how I came to be sitting in the offices of Braxton Moor Industrial at 11:30, listening to how I could find fulfillment as an assembly line worker. The work isn't glamorous, but the demand for products has become so great that BMU has decided to open up the facility to offer a night shift position. You'll arrive at 9:30, be at your station at 10, work till the bell rings at 6 a.m. You'll be given 2 30-minute breaks, one at 1 and one at 4. And you'll be expected to be at your station at all times. Understand? I nodded, telling him it sounded pretty cut and dry, and he chuckled as he said it was as easy or as hard as I decided to make it. There is one important thing you should know about the job before you take it. The owner, Mr. Moore, likes to keep the lights off after the second shift leaves. There are lights at the station, but the floor lights are cut off at 10 as a cost-saving measure. You aren't afraid of the dark, are you? He asked, making it sound like a joke. I told him I wasn't, and he seemed to like that. I answered a few more questions, and the interviewer seemed impressed. He shook my hand and told me to expect a call back. But a week later, I was milling around the break room as I waited for the others to arrive. A few others showed up, maybe 5 or 6, and it looked as if they were keeping the crew small. When a lady in a pantsuit arrived for orientation, I expected her to comment that it had been a slow hiring cycle. But no, she said it looked like everyone was there and told us to have a seat so we could get started. You will be part of our new night line. You will be placed at a station, and it will be your job to assemble the products as diagrammed. Your station has its own purpose, and as posted, you will be working in 3-hour shifts between breaks. When you're at your station, I must ask that you not leave. The floor is dark, due to the lights being on timers, and you could get hurt if you wander onto the manufacturing floor. What if we have an emergency or something? Asked a girl a row ahead of me. There's a phone at your workstation, but we do ask that you leave your cell phones in the lockers. Here, she said, indicating the locker at the back of the room. Locks will be provided, but if you want your own, we understand that too. I must impress upon you the importance of not leaving your workstation. It's very dark on the work floor, and you could get hurt or killed if you go exploring on your own, We went over a few things, mostly the general idea of AC manufacture, but that line kept sticking in my head. Was the machinery on while the lights were off? The cost-saving measure had to be negligible when compared to the cost of running the machines. Wouldn't it make more sense to just shut down at night? I was still thinking about it as they led us out to the floor and showed us the stations. They were little plexiglass booths with an open back, and the conveyor belt would send the parts you needed to your station for assembly. It was pretty straightforward, and I could see diagrams at each station that showed you how your pieces snapped in and how each station did its part. The second shifters were kind enough to show us what each station did, telling us that each one was pretty much the same in the long run. I found myself hanging out around Station 4 for the most part, and when the bell rang at 10, I stepped inside and figured I'd stay here. The guy who had been showing me the ropes, his hand-stitched name tag reading Russ, shook my hand in passing, wishing me luck on my first night. Something was stuck to my palm when he left, but he walked off too fast for me to call out to him. Then suddenly, the others were scrambling to get to their positions, and we were getting ready to start our first night. They kept the belt running pretty slow that first night, but just as some of us started getting the hang of it, the lights went out with a resounding chunk, and we were left in individual pools cast by the safety lights over our workstation. Some of them yelled in surprise when the noise came, but I was kind of expecting it. The lights actually went out at 11 p.m., I made a note, and wouldn't come on till 6 a.m. 7 hours of working in the dark. What fun. Don't be alarmed, came a voice over the PA. You were told that the lights would be going off. Continue to work, and everything will be fine. There was some nervous chit-chat between stations, but they all pretty well went back to work. We had probably assembled about 8 or 9 air conditioners by the time 1 a.m. came, and when someone with a flashlight made a noise behind me, I jumped a little. "Break time," said a pudgy security guy with a bright light. He and another guy led us all to the break room so we could stretch our legs and get a snack. And as we ate our crackers and drank sodas, we got to know our fellow line workers a little. There were 3 girls, Maria, Lisa, and Tracy, and Kenny, a haggard-looking guy in his mid-40s, and Lewis, who was around my age. Kenny and Lewis and I sat together as we discussed what had brought us to this point in our lives. Kenny had been laid off along with the rest of the paper mill in the next town over, and Lewis had been part of a tech startup that had fallen hard. Both of them had suddenly found themselves unemployed and looking for something to pay bills with, which had led them here. "I tell you, though," Kenny said, his voice sounding spooky as it graveled out, "I can't wait to get back to the middle or day shift. Working in the dark is downright spooky. I could swear something was looking at me the whole time I was working out there. Kenny had taken the first booth, having the most experience with assembly line work, and he had the most floor space available behind him. From the fourth booth, I really couldn't see much with all the shadowy machinery behind me, but I imagined Kenneth, or whoever had taken a spot number 2, would have a front row seat for every clank and grind of the gears and bits. Might be good to invest in some ear protection, I joked, but Kenneth just shook his head. Nah, I don't reckon I'd feel any better if I couldn't hear anything. Beneath all them moving bits, it's almost like I can hear something moving out there. Like something with claws scrabbling on the ground. You guys hear anything like that? Like a weird noise under the machinery? Both Lewis and I shook our heads, and Kenny got a weird look on his face as he looked into the mouth of his soda can. It's like rats or something, I don't know. It's hard to be out there with so little light, is all I'm saying. They took us back on the floor not long after that, but what Kenny had said must have stuck in my head. I found myself listening for the scuttling as I worked. The work was honestly a little mindless. AC units are like high-end computers, at least the ones we were making, and the process was kind of idiot-proof. As long as you were paying attention and the damn unit was facing in the right direction on the belt, you were pretty much assured to put it where it needed to be. The units were coming in a little quicker now, and when the box of parts I had ran empty, I pushed the button next to the station to stop the line so I could get another box of parts. After a while, I would push the green button when I had 10 left so the line wouldn't stop because of me. The line still stopped sometimes, but I knew that if I could be as efficient as possible, it would go farther to getting on the day shift. I had hit the button at about 3 a.m., my belly really looking forward to that next break at 4, when the line stopped altogether and someone down the way dropped their box of parts loudly. I heard parts and pieces scatter, the worker apologizing to the guard who had brought it to her, and as the sound of the line died down again, I looked into the gloom of the factory and thought I heard something out there. There was definitely the clang of metal and the whir of moving parts, but there was something else out there too. A smaller sound, a skittering sound, and as I fixed on it, I saw something else, a pair of coal red eyes that looked at me through the gloom. We locked eyes for a moment, whatever possessed those eyes very interested in my attention. But when the little bell went off to signify the line was going again, I turned back to get my parts in before it moved on. I glanced over my shoulder again, looking for the source of the eyes, but they were already gone. By 5:30, the light was coming in through the window, and when 6 a.m. hit, the lights came on just as loudly as they had gone off, signaling the end of the work night. We filed out as the day shift filed in, and the lady in the pantsuit from orientation told us we had built about 60 units last night. The general expectation is 300 in a 24-hour period, but that was a full line. You should be very proud of your efforts, but tonight, your target will be 100 units, since you know what you're doing now. Lewis and I walked out talking, Kenneth saying he had parked out front and going the other way, and as I climbed into my car and headed home, I was actually looking forward to hitting the line again tonight. It wasn't hard work, just tedious, and it was honestly kind of nice to have something easy to do. I knew the pressure would be on tonight to make more and keep the line moving, but I felt sure that we could manage it. I had already forgotten about the weird eyes as I pulled into the front yard and headed up the stairs to sleep, but when I put my hand in my pocket, I remembered the scrap of paper that Russ had handed me the night before. Wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't the scrawl that was written on the little paper square. 1. If you hear scraping from the dark, don't turn around. 2. If you smell death or rotten meat, don't look and don't stop working. 3. This one's the most important. If you see the eyes looking at you, look away as fast as possible. I looked over the note a few times, trying to decide if it was a trick or something. It would be up some of these guys' alley to try to run a goof on the new guy, and I figured maybe that was what this was. Russ had seemed pretty well put together. Normal, I mean, but I guess this might be just something people did around here. I drifted off, thinking about those eyes, thinking about how maybe the line had saved me from something terrible. But what? I decided I needed answers, but First, I needed sleep. I came in around 9 that night, getting there a little earlier than I meant to, and found a familiar face in the break room. Russ was nursing a Dr. Pepper and smiled as he saw me come in. "Hey, it's my replacement. How did 4 treat you last night?" He pulled out a chair at his table, inviting me to sit. "Pretty good," I said, getting my own soda as I took a seat near him. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about this," I said as I pushed the folded note towards him. He inhaled, putting his hand over the note as he grimaced around. "I think I'd like a smoke. How about you, kid? Can I interest you in a smoke?" I didn't smoke, but I nodded anyway and followed him out to the smoking area. The night air was bracing as we stood on the veranda of the break room, Russ lighting up as he glanced around. "You get a chance to show that to anyone?" "No." "Good. Don't. Especially not anyone from management." "Why not?" "Could get me in a lot of trouble, but I hate that they don't warn the new guys about, what's out there." I asked him what was out there, and he exhaled smoke bitterly. "Before I worked the second shift, I was on the night shift. It's not brand new, as they would like people to think it is. It's been going for years. It usually operates through word of mouth or through particular agencies. They say if you exemplify yourself on nights, it's a fast track to second shift. When I called you my replacement, you see, I wasn't kidding. I'm preparing to go to day shift, the brass ring as far as anyone around here is concerned. I've earned it, though. I've done 5 years on second shift, just waiting for an opening. But I've never forgotten the nights I spent on that dark floor as I assembled AC units by the little light overhead. It was your first night, but I'll go ahead and assume you probably saw something." I wanted to deny it for some reason, but I ended up just nodding and telling him about the eyes. He nodded and kind of blew smoke out of his nose. "Yeah, the eyes. How many sets did you see?" "Just 1, I told him, not really liking the question. "Good. 1's okay. If you see 2 sets, one above the other, look away immediately. If you see 3 sets, well, it's probably already too late by then." "Too late for what?" I asked, not liking all the secrecy. "I don't know, but it's not something you want to mess with. It takes people sometimes, people who really see it or do something it doesn't like. You can hear it when it's getting close. Its claws or whatever are sharp, and I've seen the maintenance guys trying to buff them off the floor sometimes. There's a smell to it as well, like rotten garbage or old meat, but you only really smell it if it gets close. The eyes are the most important part. Don't look at it if you can help it. It doesn't like being looked at. But if you're looking and it opens its 3rd set of eyes, it's probably too late anyway. At that point, don't blink, because the second you blink, it'll get you. I heard the higher-ups were impressed with you and the guy in Spot 1. Get through your training period, and they'll likely bump one, if not both of you, up to mid-shift. Take the promotion if they do. Get off nights as fast as you can, and don't look back. It's a death trap, a trap that gets closer to killing you the longer you... The door opened then, and the woman in the pantsuit stuck her head out, smiling at Russ and I. "There you are. Everyone's ready to get going. Russ, I trust you aren't trying to scare the new guy off." Russ smirked, pitching his cigarette away as he turned to go back in. "Just showing the newbie the ropes, Miss Baker. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I want to make sure he makes it to mid-shift." "As do we all," the woman said, smiling at Russ as he took his leave. That night was rough. We were going from the time we got there, till the accident happened at 2 a.m. The lady had told us flatly that she was giving us a goal of 100 units by 6 a.m., and she assured us that she was serious. If you are moved onto the other shifts, there will be daily goals to meet. Bonuses are given to shifts that meet their goals, but layoffs often follow the ones that don't. Don't get laid off because of dilly-dallying. By our first break of the night, we had made about 50. We all sat together that night, talking about how if we kept it up, we'd make our goal by the time the next break came around. Everyone was excited, wanting to make our goal on the second day. It wasn't as if it had never been done before, but we were excited to make it happen, nonetheless. Kenneth was quiet as we talked, though, shivering a little as he sat and munched the sandwich he'd brought for dinner. It was clear that something was on his mind, but whatever it was, he had no intention of sharing it with us. We came back at about 1:30 and set to our task. We were making good time, sending them down as quickly as we could, but that's when we heard the noise. It was different than the sound when the lights went on. This one was a lighter sound, like the buzzing just before the lights go out. I glanced up, my eyes seeing the lights overhead buzz, and then suddenly they went out. Not just mine, but all of them went out, all at once. It was like a breaker had been thrown, and the voice of the security guy came overhead and told us to calm down while they got the lights back on. I heard the chit-chat erupt further down, even the winking of an illegal cell phone as the flashlight came on, but I kept my eyes on the line. I remembered Russ telling me about the eyes and the claws, and I was afraid to look too hard into the shadows. I heard something as the machinery powered down slowly, a noise on the edge of hearing. I heard the light scamper of nails, and my spine nearly tingled. As the machines came to a halt, the clicking sounded thunderous without the noise to cover it. It was quiet, like mice feet, but sounded to me like fingernails walking across bricks. It clipped along like a whole procession of fingers, and I wondered if there was more than one. I kept my eyes forward, the clicking going past, and that's when I smelled the smell. Russ hadn't done it justice. It was like roadkill in the sun, like the piles of guts my grandpa used to leave outside the slaughterhouse after he butchered a deer. And as it moved past, the cloud settled over me. It took everything I had not to gag, and as the cloud went away, I heard others comment on it. When someone further down the row screamed, I turned in time to see the lights come back on and see Lisa pressed against the wall of her workstation, hyperventilating. The security guys came in a hurry as her screams peeled up towards the ceiling, and the assembly line ground to a halt once again. After some quiet talk, Lisa was escorted off the floor, and we had to figure out how to continue without her. Tracy agreed to work both stations, but Tracy hadn't been fast to start with, and our productivity slowed and lost momentum. We managed another 30 in this way, Tracy and Lewis swapping out from time to time, and we ended our night with about 80 units. The woman seemed pleased that we had made it so close after losing a person, but when I saw Lisa in the parking lot after I got out, I realized I wanted to know what had set her off. Had she been sitting out here for the last 4 hours? Did she not have a car of her own? "You okay?" I asked, coming to sit beside her at the bus stop. She nodded, sniffling a little as she looked at her shoes. I don't think I'm coming back tonight." "Why?" I asked. We had never been close. I don't think I'd ever actually spoken to her before now, but she seemed willing to talk as we sat on the cold bench by the bus stop. I had my phone out, using the light. I knew I shouldn't, but I took it on the floor. I turned around, wanting to take a picture to post later, just a joke post. But when I snapped the picture, I found something else. It was shadowy. I couldn't see it very well, but it was terrible, she said with a shudder. It was like a scuttling tumor with too many teeth. Its eyes were like little pits, devoid of life. I don't know what I saw, but it made me feel like I was a little girl again, listening to the monsters under my bed. I offered to take her home, but she said she would rather just wait on the bus. I sat with her until it got there, and that night, Lisa wasn't there. There was someone new waiting for us, a young kid who looked fresh out of high school, and we welcomed Nick onto the assembly line. He took up Lisa's old spot, bopping his head as he listened to music at his station, and was never bothered by the problems that Kenneth and I seemed to be plagued by. I forgot to mention that Lisa wasn't the only casualty of the night shift, it seemed. Kenneth didn't stop coming to work. He had bills to pay and people depending on him, but he just got more and more haggard looking as the week went on. He clearly wasn't sleeping, and he seemed anxious every time he had to return to the floor after breaks or at the start of shift. This went on till Wednesday of our third week. It went on until Kenneth snapped. It was another night of working the assembly line, making AC units as fast as we possibly could. We were easily meeting our 100 units a night goal and had even completed 125 a few times. The higher-ups were impressed with their new prospects, but the word was that Kenneth and I were the standouts. The talk was that at the end of the first month, Braxton Moore was planning to extend jobs to the standouts on the floor, and my name was on the list next to Kenneth's. If he had just held out for another couple of days, Kenneth would have been free of the demons that haunted his night. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and the noises had been worse than usual. The skittering had gone back and forth since 8 o'clock, and the smell had been something constant. Security had claimed there was a dead raccoon in the vents or something, but I think most of us suspected it was something else. More than a few of them had noticed the smell, if not the clicking nails, and the eyes that sometimes found you were hard to ignore. We were all doing our best to ignore it when Kenneth suddenly loosed a primal scream and made us all jump. "Go away! I'm sick of this! I'm sick of all of this! I'm gonna kill you!" he yelled, fists balled as he stalked into the darkness. He ran off into the gloom, and before I could think better of it, I went after him. Lewis and Kenneth had become something like friends to me in the last few weeks, and I couldn't let Kenneth go off and get himself killed. I ran after him, the dark closing around me, but I had stumbled about 50 feet on the floor and hit my head on something as I went down hard. I lost a couple of minutes, but I realized how much I had nearly lost when my vision cleared. There were 2 sets of open eyes hovering over me, and the third had just slid open. The creature towered over me, standing on a body covered in long, twitching fingers, grinning down at me with a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth. His body was lumpy like a giant potato, but his teeth were just as sharp as Lisa had said. His eyes were burning pits with smoldering coals, all of them staring at me as I lay on my back, my head throbbing. I nearly lost before it even started, but I remembered before the pain could force a wincing blink out of me. I held the creature's nightmare gaze, the eyes smoldering into me like hot coals, and I could feel it regarding me as its heat dried my corneas. I had always been pretty good at staring contests when I was a kid, but this one took the cake. It probably made a difference that my life was on the line, but in a lot of ways, this was just another bully trying to stare me down. Nothing mattered at that moment. Not Kenneth, not the job, nothing but beating this thing and proving it could be done. If I lost, then I'd never know it. If I won, however, I'd be the only one who would know, since no one would believe me. It felt like we stared at each other for hours, but when all 3 sets of eyes finally blinked, I breathed in a sigh of relief. It clicked away on those nubby legs, the ends likely tipped in claws or something, and when I saw flashlights and heard people calling my name, I started backpedaling towards them. The security guys were as relieved to see me as I was to see them, and they helped me to the break room to get the little gash on my head seen about. They told me to take it easy for a while, and I was glad for an excuse to breathe. After what I had just been through, a little break was the best I could hope for before having to suck it up and go back to the floor. The woman in the pantsuit came in half an hour later, and after finding everyone in the break room, told us to go home for the night. They still hadn't found Kenneth, and didn't sound like they expected to. She asked me to stop before I could leave, calling me into a nearby office before handing me a manila envelope. Inside was an offer for the second shift, something I'd been expecting to see. "The higher-ups are impressed with your work, and except for leaving your post tonight to try to get Kenneth, they were impressed with your ability to follow expressed rules. They want to offer you a spot on the mid-shift, if you want it." That was about a year ago, and I've been working mids ever since. The shift is as different as, well, as night and day, not to sound too cliche. With the floor lit up, it's easy to see all the things that looked scary in the dark and sort out all the moving parts as just machinery or belts or something else. I haven't heard the clicking or smelled the smell since starting on mids, but sometimes I still see those eyes. It isn't anything consistent, but it's more often than I would like. Sometimes if you look up into the mouth of the industrial fans near the ceiling, just before shift change, You can see a glowing pair of eyes just waiting for the lights to go out. It fears the lights for some reason, and it won't come onto the floor until the lights are off and the night shifts are bathed in the protective bubbles. I won't work nights anymore, and no one has asked, but every time I think about picking up a night shift for some extra cash, I think about those eyes and decide differently. Lewis is coming to mids next week, his rise taking a bit longer than mine, and he seems glad. It's nice being out of the darkness and the overbearing interests of the night overseer who scuttles and watches eternally. One more story for you, and then I think it's going to be time for me to head to a little nap, maybe. You know, what day isn't best when it hits about the midpoint and you can go lay down and have yourself a little nap. But don't worry, I saved the best for last. As a board game aficionado myself, I've played quite a few. I enjoy them. I think most of it is I like hanging out with good friends and having a good time. But let's hope if you also enjoy board games, you don't run afoul of the Mystery Man. I was looking for something to make my end of summer sleepover amazing. What I got was a sleepover that no one would ever forget. Margot, Jenny, and I had been friends for years, since kindergarten even, and we were getting ready to start 7th grade in a few days and wanted to hold our annual slumber party. I had the pigs in a blanket, the chips that Margot liked, the sour gummy worms for Jenny, and a huge bottle of Dr. Fizz for us to share. I was getting the movies ready when I realized I hadn't found our favorite game yet, and started hunting through the closet. We had played Mall Madness, a game my mom had given me from when she was young, and it was a hit at any sleepover. We would shop till we drop, charge it up, and then laugh about who had the best deals and spent the least amount of money. It was great. I had probably replaced the batteries in it a dozen or more times, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I had always put it at the top of my closet, right beside my old Barbie travel case, but today it was nowhere to be found. I blew out in exasperation, wondering where it could be, but ultimately decided to go check the attic. The game had come from the attic after all, so maybe Mom had put it back up there. I pulled down the ladder, glad it was still daylight so it didn't look so spooky up there, and went to go look for Mall Madness. It was kind of a chore because Mom is something of a hoarder. Dad calls her a pack rat, and it seems pretty fitting. She keeps everything. She had clothes from when my sister and I were little. She's got art projects from when she was in school up there. And she had boxes and boxes of old photos and memory books, all kinds of things. I pushed aside a bunch of dresses and found an area dominated by old toys and games that she had saved. It was a mishmash of dolls and books and some old doll houses and a couple of dusty board games. I didn't find Mall Madness, but I found about 7 others. Apples to Apples was for babies, and Uncle Wiggily looked kind of weird. Don't Wake Daddy was missing pieces, some of which I'd lost, and Monopoly was just too long. I was about to give up when I saw a black box at the bottom of the stack that I didn't think I'd ever seen before. It was covered in dust, the letters barely visible, and I pulled it down, tugging it quickly so the other boxes wouldn't fall. I wiped off the cover and read the red lettering on it slowly, the red and black hard to read since it was so faded. Mystery Man, the name proclaimed, and I was about to open it and see the instructions when my mom called and let me know that my friends were here, so I ran downstairs to see them. I tossed the game onto my bed as I ran past, figuring we would check it out later, and we were soon all laughing and jumping as we got excited about the night. We ate dinner, we played hide and seek in the backyard, we hung out in my treehouse, and as it started to get dark, we came in to watch movies, play games, and start the rest of the evening's activities. Dad works nights, and Mom didn't really ever make us go to bed when we were having a sleepover. We usually passed out sometime around midnight, but tonight We wanted to stay up till we heard my dad pull in from work. We wanted to see if we could stay up till dawn, just to see if we could, and we had enough snacks and sugar to manage it, we thought. By 11:30, we had watched 2 movies, eaten most of the snacks, and drank half a bottle of soda, as we braided each other's hair during the end part of Balto. We were a little bored with movies, and Jenny asked if we could play Mall Madness for a little bit. That was when I remembered the game, and told them I had something different in mind tonight. The game had worked its way half under my pillow somehow, and when I pulled it out, my friends oohed and awed at it appreciatively. We opened the box and found a black board with silver spaces, the big orange phone in the middle having an honest-to-God spin dial on it. We had cards with descriptions on them, and it felt more like we were assembling a police sketch than a dream date. We would go around the board, landing on spaces and drawing cards, and when someone found a card with a number on it, we would dial the number, and it would help us determine the identity of our mystery man. "So it's a little like Dream Date then," Margot said. "Seems weird," Jenny said, "like we're hunting him or something." I looked at the instructions, but they gave no particular instruction on the purpose for making a description of the guy. We would take turns until we had assembled our mystery man, and then we would call 000 on the phone and give our description to the person on the other end. Somehow, they would know if it was right or not, and tell us that we had won, or tell us to try again. "Simple enough," I said, and I picked up the dice and rolled first. It was about 4 turns later when Jenny landed on a card that gave her a phone call. She dialed the number, but she was having some trouble until I showed her how the rotary phone worked. Mom had showed me, saying that was how they used to call people 1,000,000 years ago. And once she got the number plugged in, she held the phone against her head and waited for the click. Someone came on after 3 rings, a weird staticky voice that I didn't much like, and whatever it told Jenny, she didn't seem to like it either. After a few minutes, she put the phone down, her hands shaking a little. "Well, what did it say?" Margot asked. Jenny cleared her throat, trying again to get control. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. The phone man said the call was just for me." She handed me the dice, her hands very sweaty and a little shaky, and we continued. It was my turn to use the phone next, but Margot pulled out a card and laid it down. The card let her steal my phone call, and I laughed a little as I stuck my tongue out at her. She dialed the number and held the phone, interested to hear what was to come. None of us thought it was real. Well, Margot and I didn't, but Jenny scooted a little away as she made her call. The voice picked up, and something quick and harsh made Margot's smile slip off her face as she listened. Her lips trembled as she put the phone down, and she wrote something on a piece of paper and shook her head when I tried to pass her the dice. The guy on the phone said to let you roll again. He said some other stuff, but I'm not supposed to say." I rolled again and grumbled as I landed just shy of a phone space. I wanted to hear what had them so spooked. This was a board game, ages 10 and up and all that, and there was no way it could be that terrifying. We continued taking turns, the girls wanting to keep playing, despite their obvious discomfort. Finally, I got my wish. I drew a card after landing on a spot, and it was a phone booth. Searched the deck for a phone card and dialed the number. I took the first one I found and dialed the number, letting it ring 5 times before someone picked up.
"Mystery man is blonde, about 6 feet tall, and a wide-brimmed hat. That's for your ears only, Toots. So don't tell any of those other little bitches what I said. I'll know."
That was a little weird, and I put the phone down with some hesitation. I didn't think they could say things like that in a board game like this. Margot and Jenny didn't bother to ask what he'd said, and I made notes as Margot took her turn. I had a blonde card and a wide-brimmed hat card, but I didn't have one that said 6 feet tall. I guessed I'd have to draw for it. Meanwhile, Margot had gotten another phone call, and as she listened, I saw her glance over at Jenny, and the look wasn't friendly. I didn't know what the phone guy was telling her, but it seemed to be making her mad. We played the game for hours, and in that time, the game got worse and worse. Anytime Jenny got a phone call, it nearly put her into tears. Anytime Margot got a phone call, it seemed to make her angrier and angrier. I tried to take the phone from Jenny at one point, offering to take the call for her, but she shook her head and told me the phone man had said that she had to take it, whether she liked it or not. Yeah, Margot said, her eyes looking mean. She needs to take her calls, just like the rest of us. As the game went on, we got more clues. I learned that my mystery man was a 6-foot-tall blonde in a wide-brimmed hat with a mustache, black pants, and a white shirt. I had most of that, but I was still missing the 6 feet tall with a mustache card. The man on the phone had alluded to the fact that Margot would soon make her move against Jenny, the two being like dogs ready to fight. And when Margot threw down a card, it looked more like a knife toss than a friendly showing. White glove. I get to take one of your cards, Jenny. Jenny nodded, holding her cards out like a fan, and Margot picked the fourth one, pulling it back smugly before glowering at it. You switched it, she accused, flipping it around to show Jenny a green sweater card. Jenny shook her head. Nuh-uh. Yes, you did, Margot accused. The phone man said you were a cheater, but I didn't want to believe it at first. Looks like he was right. I never cheated, Jenny said, almost crying. Then why wasn't this a green scarf card? The phone guy... But she brought her teeth together hard, and it sounded like wood clacking together. What? I asked. What did he say? Nothing, Margot said. Doesn't matter. Just play the game. Jenny didn't look like she wanted to keep playing the game, but she didn't look like she was capable of stopping either. The game would continue, whether we wanted it to or not. And after that, the phone calls got even weirder. I pulled a card, dialed a number, and was greeted with about 10 seconds of heavy breathing before he spoke.
The mystery man has a long, sharp knife. He's walking down the street. Turn left on Martin Drive. I'll soon be there.
That sent chills through me. Martin Drive was 2 streets away. That was like an easy 20-minute walk. What the heck was this? These weren't pre-recordings. This had to be live, but that was impossible. The game was probably 20 years old at least. It couldn't happen. Look, I said, hanging up the phone. Let's just call it a draw. I think this is getting a little too real, and... The orange phone rang, and I felt my words wither in my mouth as we just sat there and looked at it. It was like watching a bomb tick down, none of us wanting to be the one to touch it. It just kept ringing and ringing, and finally, to my surprise, Jenny reached out to pick it up. Her hands shook, her breath coming in quick gasps. She lifted it to her ear, and I heard someone snarl something as she winced like she'd been struck. She held the phone out for me, hands moving like someone with nerve damage, and said it was for me. I took it and held it to my ear and said hello.
Whether you play the game or not, you little bitch, the mystery man is still coming. If none of you wins, then he's coming to get all of you. But if one of you manages to win, then they might be safe. You never know. Better finish what you started.
I hung up the phone, trying to keep my teeth from chattering as I told them what he'd said. That's not true, Margot said. The phone guy told me that I had to beat Jenny, or I'd get taken. He said Jenny was trying to win on purpose so the mystery man would get me. Jenny burst into tears. He said that you two were trying to sacrifice me to the mystery man and that I deserved it. He said I was useless, just holding you two back, and I deserved to get dragged away. I thought about it, weighing what he had said. Sounds like if we all win, then he can't get at any of us. We have to work together to get out of this. Jenny shook her head. He said if I told you what my mystery man looked like, that he'd get me for sure. Me too, Margot said, the anger slowly turning into fear. Well, who cares what he said? He's coming regardless, so we have to do something. So we played the game cooperatively. Helping each other proved a better strategy, and Margot soon had everything for her mystery man. Margot dialed 000 and declared that her mystery man was 5'4" and bald, with a hockey mask and a machete and a white jumpsuit. The voice came from the rotary, making us all jump with its suddenness as it reverberated around the room.
You have discovered your mystery man, Margot. You are safe for now.
We were still for a moment. Then Jenny reluctantly picked up the dice and kept playing. She got a card, dialed the number, and choked out a sob as the man on the phone told her about her mystery man. He's on your street, she said, sobbing a little, and I rolled the dice so we could get to her turn again. White glove, I said. Let me see 'em. Jenny held up her cards, but she started nodding at one that was 5 into the stack. I drew it, and sure enough, it was the mustache. Now all I needed was the 6 foot tall and the knife. Jenny went again, drew a card, and breathed a sigh of relief as she dialed 000. My mystery man is 6 feet tall, dark-haired, with a rope and a long coat. The phone made the sound again before declaring,
Jenny, you have discovered your mystery man. You are safe. For now.
I picked up the dice when I heard something creak the door downstairs. It was long and loud, like a funhouse door at the carnival. I tossed the dice, moved my piece, and drew a card. It was a phone call, and I threw it away and rolled again. I moved, drew, and pumped my fist as I got the 6 foot card. I was rolling again when the phone began to ring. I let it ring, rolling and moving like a madman. I drew, but it wasn't what I needed. I got another phone card and threw it away. I could hear my mystery man on the stairs, moving as slow as any horror movie villain. I drew the gun and cursed as I tossed it away. I drew another white glove card, but I tossed it and kept rolling and moving. I could hear him on the stairs, his boots clumping menacingly. I had to find the knife. I had to banish the mystery man. If I didn't, it would mean my death. He came onto the landing when the ringing phone became too much, and I picked it up and put it down again. It started to ring after a few seconds, and I did it again before moving my piece. I could still hear his boots in the hallway that led to my room, and they grew louder by the second. Jenny and Margot were watching the door to my bedroom like it might explode, but I was focused on the task. Rope, toss. A wide-brimmed hat, toss. He was walking past my little sister's room now. He'd pass Mom and Dad's room after that, and then it would be down to my room at the end of the hall. What would happen if he got to me? Would they even believe Margot and Jenny? Would the mystery man leave them alone once he'd got me? I didn't know, but my heart leapt into my throat. I'd drawn the knife. I was done. I dialed 000 as soon as the door opened to my room. Jenny and Margot gasped, sliding away from the board and as far from the door as they could get. My mystery man has blonde hair, a wide-brimmed hat, is 6 feet tall, has black pants, a white shirt, and a knife. I practically screamed it into the phone, falling forward to cover it as I expected that long, sharp knife to stab into me at any minute. I heard the tone, and then heard the phone crackle again.
That was a close one, Heather. You're safe from your mystery man. For now.
I just lay there for a while, panting and trembling, as Margot and Jenny came to comfort me. They told me they had seen him standing in the doorway, his blonde hair spilling beneath his hat, and a sharp knife in his hand. He had raised it, took a single step, and then just disappeared into nothingness. We lay there, just kind of basking in the feeling of being alive, until I heard my dad pulling into the driveway. We had made it. We stayed up until sunrise, just like we wanted to. I went down and hugged my dad, who seemed surprised that I was still awake, but glad to see me, and then the three of us turned in. I put Mystery Man back in the attic, and have never touched it again. One brush with death was enough for me. So if you find a copy of your own while trolling through the thrift stores and antique malls in your area, be very careful with it. The mystery man you find might not be a mystery for very long. And just like that, our time is at an end. Oh, but don't be too sad. I'm sure I'll be back again with more great stories and more great time spent with you. So until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.